Welcome everyone to the Unboxing Careers podcast. I'm your host Greg Zakowitz. On today's episode, we're going to explore a career in a convergence of fields. So we're going to say medical and social science, but I will let our guest, Dr. Korie Leigh, explain exactly what that means and what a thanatologist is. So Korie, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for having an interest in this very niche field.
So up until, 2 weeks ago, I had no idea I've never even heard of a thanatologist. So this is going to be really good because I'm going to get to learn something, and I'm sure the audience will as well. We were talking offline. I'm like, is it safe to say we're in this field? And you're like, well, you could do this, this, and this. So I'm going to leave that to you today, if that works. So let's quickly do some level setting. Let's just tell the audience, what a thanatologist is, but your role, how long you've been in the industry, and we'll just piggyback off there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Thanatology, and this is my party trick. Whenever someone asks what I do, I say, "Ooh, do you remember your Greek mythology?" And then I'll follow that up and say, "Do you remember who Thanos is the god of?" And typically people are like, "Oh, like he was in like the Marvel movies." And Thanos is the god of death, right? And so anytime you have ology is the study of. So Thanatology is the multidisciplinary profession of death, dying, grief, and loss. So that encompasses a lot.
Okay, very good. And how long have you been in the field for?
So I have been working clinically in the end-of-life space for about 22 years. I have been a certified thanatologist for about 15 years. Most recently, I became a fellow in thanatology. And I also run an academic program that is both a Master of Science in Thanatology. We have a postgraduate certificate. We also just launched a Bachelor of Science in Thanatology. And I have been in that academic position for about 5 years.
Awesome. So you've been in thanatology for a long time, but you mentioned you were in the kind of end of life field for, I think, 20, 21 years, I think you said. So the first question that's going to come to mind is, how did you decide to go into end of life as a career?
It was definitely something that happened to me as opposed to me choosing it. The abridged version is I started out working in typical hospitals, mostly pediatric hospitals, and I was another career that a lot of people haven't heard of, called a child life specialist. And so child life specialists work mostly in pediatric hospitals, helping pediatric patients to cope with the hospitalization. We help prepare for medical procedures. We help explain to them what's happening to their body and why. We help siblings. We help parents cope. And inevitably, in that line of work, I worked with a lot of really sick and vulnerable children who were dying. It wasn't my intention to work in pediatric palliative and pediatric hospice care, but it's something that I ended up doing quite quickly after I graduated. And in terms of stress and coping theory, what happens is when there's a stressor, we tend to either move towards that stressor so that we can understand it, or we move away from it and we help to mitigate the emotions experienced by the stressor. Personally, I'm an information-based coper. So what that means is when I was 22 years old and I had 7 children die in 1 week when I was just out of my undergrad, I didn't know what to do with the feelings that I had. I wanted to keep working in this space, but I didn't feel equipped. I didn't feel like I had the necessary training, background, and education. And as it happens, I did the Google rabbit hole and I ended up finding Thanatology. And at the time, it was connected to a different degree. So technically, the master's was a Master of Science in Public Health with a concentration in Thanatology. And that is how I entered the field.
Okay, so you went to school for medical and then just kind of by happenstance fell into that track, that path.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just want to go back just super quick, and I
Yeah.
appreciate the explanation. When did you decide you wanted to go into the medical field?
So I was one of those kids that just knew what I wanted to
Yeah.
do. I didn't have a name for it, right? Because the field of child life, and even in 2026, lots of people don't know what it is unless you have a medically fragile child or a kid who's been hospitalized. So in my 11-year-old, 12-year-old mind, I was making up a profession because I wanted to work. And I have a journal entry where I've gone back and I've seen my own words. I wanted to work with sick kids and help them feel better. But I didn't want to be a pediatrician. I didn't want to be a medical doctor because I wanted to use music and play and art and expressive modalities. So I thought that I was making up this career where I could become a music therapist, but I could also use play. And lo and behold, there is a profession where you can integrate these with the foundation of childhood growth and development theory. So really being quite well versed at understanding typical child development and how stress, hospitalization, and illness will impact that development.
So that thought when you're a kid is very mature, I would say, and kind of out of the box to say, hey, I want to work with sick children. And you had these ideas about ways to do that. Was there something personal in your life, or was that just something that you saw? I don't know, maybe it was a TV and you didn't recognize it, but you saw some sort of vulnerability and you clung to it. Was there something personal, or was it just what you wanted to do?
I think, looking back, I think that the environment that I grew up in, both of my parents were first responders, paramedics,
Okay.
CMTs, firefighters, and then my dad became a police officer at one point. So I grew up quite familiar with crisis and trauma. My parents also had a philosophy to not shield me from death, not shield me from the realities of life. And this is at a time when a lot of kids were not talked to honestly and openly about these type of topics. And so I do think that those type of experience informed and influenced an already very emotionally attuned and empathetic little girl.
Very good. And that makes tons of sense. You're exposed to something very tangential to that you can piggyback off of. Okay, thanks for the clarification. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want to jump back now, and I've got this list that I normally go through in a relative order, and now I'm going to jump all over the place on you. So I apologize, and I
Do
apologize to the viewers as
it.
well. So we were talking offline. You're like, hey, you could be an archaeologist and do this. You could do whatever, and we were just kind of chatting about that. So I typically want to ask about the normal career path from an education side, right? So you mentioned what you did. Is there, if someone wants to go into, say, this, we'll say a loose field of end of life for kind of whoever, but also, children, what is the career path to go? Do they need a medical background? Do they need a certain type of background? There's a certain program they look at. Walk us through kind of what the education side of this really looks like.
Yeah, and it also really depends on where geographically you are. So philosophically, there's a little bit, and it's not necessarily a divide, it's just how the field is practiced in America versus in Europe, for instance. So here in the United States, we look at thanatology as an applied practice. So we take these theories and these concepts and we apply them to work with people who are at the end of life grieving. And we do that either by physically being in the room with them or we're engaging in research that will directly influence clinicians. In a place like Europe, and I know that that's a very broad term because there's a lot of countries in Europe, but generally speaking, it is a bit more philosophically based. So for example, I have a whole bunch of colleagues in the Netherlands who are linguists, and they are also thanatologists, and they are interested particularly in the intersection of language, how we talk about death, how we use certain language when we're grieving, and then a particular colleague is interested in dead and dying languages, and he does a lot of his work in Peru, in the Amazon. right? So, and then I have another colleague who is a sociologist and who looks at the way that people intersect with graveyards. And I could just keep going with like lots of different examples of how it really depends on if you are an applied practitioner or want to engage in research that is going to have an applicable, endpoint, or if you're more interested in the sociological, philosophical, anthropological point of view. So here in the United States, thanatology, you can be a thanatologist in a few different ways. You certainly can have a medical background or be a social worker or be a chaplain or be an art therapist and want to further your existing career in that field and focus in on end of life or grief. You can also, like a handful of my students, come from a completely different background. We had someone in marketing. We had someone in finance who never took a psychology class, didn't really have any kind of medical background, but had a personal lived experience of a loss that impacted their life in such a way that it changed their purpose and what they wanted to do. And so because they didn't have that background, they chose to come to a program like mine, which is an entire master's degree, which teaches the foundations. Versus somebody else maybe that already has a master's degree, you might want to do a certificate and take a couple of the classes to give you the foundation. We also have a lot of folks that are interested in more grassroots community-based, death positive spaces. So people that want to become death doulas, people that are artists. So there's another student of mine who was a fiber artist. So she used fabric and fiber arts, and she wanted to create an art studio that had a focus on using fiber arts specifically to support those who are grieving. So these are just some of the examples of like students that I've personally intersected with that have come from different backgrounds.
Okay, so it sounds like you can pretty much do anything, and then if there's a related application of said career, it's not always because you use the finance as an example, but if there's a application of a said career, you can then get a certification or a master's or kind of whatever accreditation to then apply that to that practice.
Yes,
it's one way.
correct.
The other way is just to do a career pivot and go into that. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And then within thanatology, because there's only a handful of academic programs for thanatology. I happen to be the director of one of them. So there are definitely a few of them. However, it isn't the only way academically to become what we call a certified thanatologist. So the certification is an exam that you take after you have achieved a certain amount of educational credits, a certain amount of practice experience. I think it's like 2,000 or 3,000 hours. So you have the 3,000 hours experience, you have the courses, you sit for the exam that is offered through ADEC, the Association of Death Education and Counseling. And when you pass that exam, you can put the letter CT after your name. And after you have practiced as a CT for several years, you have the option that I have taken of becoming a fellow, which essentially says you've been practicing for a decade. You write books, you teach, you engage in research, you take your thanatology practice, and you are giving back to the community in some way.
Okay, so I want to go through kind of the progression of a career, and let's focus on kind of your background there, because there's all these tangential things. So focus on kind of what you know best from your lived experience. So you went to school, medical degree, right? Started working. So like your 2,000 to 3,000 hours of going through that, kind of walk through that a little bit. So I asked you to focus on you, but then my second question is going to be, well, what about me? If like I'm a marketer, how do I get the experience of 2,000 to 3,000 hours in practice working with someone when maybe I don't have the background to then be hireable for that particular practice, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes,
thinking through this.
Absolutely. So I'm actually going to start with that because those are the type of questions that I get asked most often. The career path that I have is so unique. I'm happy to talk about it, but for someone like you, maybe someone with a marketing background, someone who was a mathematician, someone who just comes from a completely different world, the first thing that I recommend to everybody is to find a local hospice, call up their volunteer coordinator, and get the volunteer process started so that you can be a hospice volunteer. I oftentimes become quite concerned when students come to my program and they say, I want to be a death doula. I want to be a grief counselor. Okay, well, have you actually sat with a person who's at the end of life that isn't your own family member? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. And so it is incredibly important to have that hands-on facilitated experience, because with hospice, you get training, you get continual support, you get supervision, and you have a built-in team of people who are doing the same thing as you. And sometimes I have had a few students as well think they want to go into this field, start my program, and they haven't started their volunteer hours yet. And a month or 2 into the volunteer hours, realize this isn't for me. This isn't what I thought it was. And so for anybody that is considering this as a field or a path forward, I highly recommend, if end of life is where you want to be, go to your local hospice. If grief and loss is where you want to be, find a grief center, particularly a children's grief center, even if you don't want to work with kids, because that's going to give you hands-on, incredibly important experiences that you just simply cannot get in a classroom. And that's going to help you understand, okay, yes, this is what I want to do, or not my cup of tea.
So because the field can be applied to so many other fields, and you mentioned there's not a ton of like dedicated programs around the country for someone to just pick up and be like, hey, I want to go in Thanatology, let me go to my local state school or whatever. Talking to someone in high school who thinks they maybe want to go into end of life, you mentioned the hospice as kind of a way as a bit of a filter or lens to get a sense of it. But is your recommendation, or maybe not a better way, but a more practical way to go, is to discover what I say secondary, but like what another passion might be, and kind of do dual tracks? Does that make sense, right? So if I have a passion in, let's just say, art, and I might flame out of Thanatology, like is the advice to be, hey, get the art degree or XYZ degree, and also do this thing in conjunction with it so that you can make an easy pivot? Would that be a recommend? Like if your kid was coming to you and be like, hey, mom, this is what I want to do, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, and I think it's an important question. I have students all the time asking, especially in high school and like freshman, sophomore year of undergrad, should I find a bachelor's in Thanatology? And I pretty much, even though I have a bachelor's in Thanatology program at my university, I pretty much always encourage my students to major in something like psychology so that you can have the foundational knowledge of which Thanatology builds off from. Likewise, if you really love art and you love helping people, find a bachelor's in art therapy or a double major in art and psychology. Maybe, being a mental health counselor is your calling. Awesome. Get credentialed for that. Do the hours for that. Practice for a little while. Come back to a program like what I have and either get your master's or get a postgraduate certificate. So, and I say that also, with a little asterisk over here, being that sometimes you can also make a complete pivot, right? And have, like I said, no background in psychology. That requires those students tend to have to do a little bit more legwork, right? So some of like the theories that I talk about in the introduction class of my program, I don't teach those theories. I expect my students to kind of know what they are. And so with some of those things, they have to go back and kind of teach themselves some basic, Freud, some basic Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, which are really basic theories that you're taught in undergrad psychology.
Would it be appropriate? Would it be the right assumption to say like any sort of career advancement, right? Entry level, and then you progress up as you age, theoretically. Is the career advancement in this field really come from the underlying practice? So let's say you're in sociology, right? Or you're a social worker. Like, does your career advancement come from your social work or your therapy clients, and then you take on kind of the end of life practice along with that? And same with, say, you work inside a hospital or you're at hospice. Is that where the traditional like application of a career development would come in? Is that kind of underlying foundation and not necessarily the thanatology? Does that make sense the way I'm explaining it?
It does. It really does. And I think for the vast majority of students that I see in my program, they're coming to me already in a field. They're social workers, they're chaplains, they're nurses, they're doctors, they're working with people, but they feel like they need a depth that they haven't received in their education, or in my case, they are seeing things clinically that they want to be better equipped to handle. And they want to understand, what is the evidence-based practice for this? What does the recent research say about this? So for those type of individuals, thanatology is absolutely a way to specialize. It's a way to become more niched within an existing field. That being said, and I'm going to kind of flip the script just a little bit, because there's a whole other group of students that I see. And these are people that come to my program because they just want to talk about death. We live in such a death-phobic society. It is becoming better. We're doing a little bit of a better job. There's a lot of, death-positive movements happening. But we have a lot of students that want to come just to learn, just to talk about it. I think the oldest student that I had was 86. And their essay was essentially like, I know I'm approaching the end of my life. My generation does not handle death well. I want to be able to leave my kids a legacy that isn't shrouded in trauma and pain from my death. Like, right on. Please, I would like more 86-year-olds in the program.
Do you find, and this is probably more applicable to your particular background, but do you find there's a increased demand for people who have a focus or some sort of certification or credentialing around end of life? Because I look at it and say, okay, we're living longer than usual. But not usual, but we're living longer than ever because of medicine and just general health knowledge. And there is a larger debate and growing debate around your right to end lives, right? We have end of life states and not states and things like that. But from like a medical setting or anything that you might be related to, do you find there's an increased demand for people looking for those with some sort of credentialing or background or certification in end of life?
Yeah, and I want to emphasize the credentialing. And what I'm about to say might rub some listeners the wrong way, and I just want to say, please stay till the end. So the career of a death doula, I'm going to use this as an example, is completely unregulated. You can take a weekend workshop for 8 hours and hang a shingle on your door and call yourself a death doula, which is inherently unethical because we are working with vulnerable populations. And either getting a degree or having a legit certification that is provided by a credentialing body helps to protect our communities. It helps to provide legitimacy to this infant profession. And it helps you stand apart. It helps you be able to kind of wade through the death doulas who took their weekend workshop and have no background in end of life. And when you show up in a space, you're able to talk about the science, understand the theory, work really well with people, and do it in an ethically sound way. That being said, I also have a death doula track in my program. I want people who took that weekend workshop, who hung their shingle up and realized, I've never actually worked with someone who's grieving. I've never actually sat with someone who's dying other than my own mother. And so I want those folks to come to my program so that we can provide them with the support and scaffolding, knowledge, and resources to go out there and work ethically.
Yeah, it's really good that you said that as well. I used it more of an example of just the conversation is becoming more around, but it's really good distinction you made there. Let's talk about essential skills, because I'm assuming empathy is going to be important in this line of work. I could be wrong here, but that would be my gut feel. You're dealing with people at a very critical moment or a critical topic here, but essential skills for someone in your field who wants to work within the life, whether it's with children, adults. You gave the hospice example before. What would you say some of those key skills are that people should possess or hone to become better in this field?
Self-reflection, self-reflection, self-reflection. Being able to recognize what you feel, why you feel it, when it comes up, and then what you do with that feeling. So being able to reflect on your own body, your own experience, your own practice, curiosity, that even if you are an expert, quote unquote, or you have the credentials, that you really don't know. You don't know this family. You don't know this situation. So we have to practice compassionate listening. We have to be open and curious. We have to be self-reflective. Those things all also encompass being able to attune. And what attunement is recognizing that my nervous system is going to impact yours. And so if we're talking about something that makes me anxious, your nervous system is going to pick up on that. And so, for example, if you're working with kids and it makes you uncomfortable to talk about death, they're going to pick up on that. And that is a muscle that can be practiced over time. We can learn how to attune. We can learn how to be curious and self-reflective. And I think above and beyond that is also the skill of critical thinking, being able to take a research study, for example, and be able to say what's helpful, what's not, what does not apply to these people I'm working with, what were the limitations of that study, and how can I take what I've just read and apply it to the people I'm working with.
Do you find that people working directly with patients, so we'll take the research side out of it, but those working directly with patients, or people, I should say, is like that separation when you go home, it's not like clocking out. Like you probably take that with you. And there's a mental health aspect of that just personally. Do you, I'll say recommend, but do you find that a lot of people in this particular field who are working directly with patients, would you advise them to go to therapy to kind of figure out how to self-regulate and how to kind of disconnect those things? Or are there just tactics you can do to become better, nuanced at that?
Compassion fatigue, burnout, vicarious trauma, those are all occupational hazards of working in this field. And it is a muscle, and I'm going to keep talking about these skills as muscles. We all have the capacity for it, but we have to be taught how to use it. Personally, yes, I would highly recommend that anyone, especially entering these fields, has a therapist, even if it is short term, because the rate of burnout, particularly in hospital settings, and the rate of moral distress is through the roof for early career practitioners. Programs are getting better at recognizing these, teaching it, providing some coping mechanisms and tools, but it is one of those experiences that you have to go through it to then understand how exactly is this work impacting me. You can read about it, you can do role plays about it in graduate school, you can talk about it all you want, and then it isn't until you leave a really, really hard shift and you are sitting with yourself with these physical sensations, with these emotional responses, and that's when we have to practice those skills, but they do need to be taught.
Would you say that's the most challenging part of working in the life scenario, or would you say it's something else?
That's a good question. Personally, yeah. And I say yes because I also experienced vicarious traumatization. I left the field for a few years. I considered not coming back. And this was at a time when I didn't have the tools, right? It was during a time when I really, I'd gone through grad school. I've taken the classes. I could talk about self-care every day, all day, but self-care isn't the same and isn't enough to help combat the real trauma that people witness, particularly in a hospital setting. Now, I'll tell a quick little story. I became vicariously traumatized working in a hospital setting. I left the hospital and I went into hospice. And it was like night and day. I worked with a care team that understood my role, that understood boundaries, that understood self-care, that understood the importance of supervision. So some people are like, wait a minute, you burned out of a hospital and so you went to hospice? How is that any better? It was actually light years better because of the environment and because I was working with people who fundamentally touched death every day. And there is something incredibly transformative about people who have witnessed death, facilitated someone who's dying, been through that process day in and day out. It changes the way that you show up in the world. And in a lot of ways, it helped me to become more present and more attuned in my life. And it helped me to find a deeper purpose.
That's a really good story. You mentioned earlier in the conversation about people contacting hospice for volunteer opportunities just to kind of get a sense of it. Considering your positive experience working with hospice, are there things that you can look at with different organizations and say, oh, if they have this, it's probably a really good one, or if they're lacking this, here, just not a red flag, but a warning sign, just be mindful of these things. Is there something that separates different hospice organizations from one another, in your opinion?
Yeah, and I think, and it is also one of those things that unfortunately sometimes you have to get in there, and then you're like, oh, I thought that it was going to be like this, and it is not. It is like this. But just a couple of like basic things that you can look out for and ask questions about, particularly when you're volunteering. Not just if there's a volunteer training, but how long is it? How many hours is it? After you're trained, what kind of continual support will you receive? What kind of continual training will you be, able to participate in? What kind of evaluation will you go through? Just these are some of the things to look out for in terms of what kind of supports are in place that just might better facilitate a learning process.
Yeah, that's really good. Korie, what do you find to be the most rewarding part of your career?
There is so much pain in the world. There is so much tragedy. We live in a day and age where we are just inundated with information and exposure to trauma on levels that no generations before had access to. And given what is happening in the world and knowing that every day I can show up and I can attune and be present to someone, even if it's one person, even if it is you, Greg, today, and talking to you and having these meaningful conversations, this matters. So for people out there that are like feeling completely helpless, with just whatever is happening in your community, in the country, in the world, we can make a choice in how we show up every day for our neighbor, in our community, with our immediate family. And it matters. And so sometimes the impact I have is really big. Right? Like I'm an author of several books that are now around this country and around the world. And I receive emails quite frequently about how my book not just was helpful, but it impacted a family so much that they were able to cope when they weren't able to in the past, right? So like really big, meaningful things, all the way to little things. I'll tell another quick story. This really doesn't have anything to do with death or grief, but it has to do with how I try and show up in the world. So about 2 years ago, on Valentine's Day, I was feeling sorry for myself. And I was like, I want a smoothie. So I went to Whole Foods to go get a smoothie. And there was a gentleman behind me who was in quite a hurry. Like you could tell he was like huffing and puffing. He was quite upset that like the coffee wasn't out in time. And he was having a hard time like finding his money to pay for it. And I turned around and I was like, hey, no worries. Let me get your coffee for you. You have places to be. Go do what you need to do. And he looked at me like I had 10 heads, and he got kind of like bristly with me. Like, what do you mean? Like, I can pay for my own thing. I'm like, look, it's already paid for. Have a good day. About a year later, I was at the farmer's market, and this guy walks up to me and he said, hey, you probably don't remember me, but about a year ago in Whole Foods on Valentine's Day, your kindness made me pause and realize like I wasn't being a very nice person that day. And so I want to thank you, even though I probably wasn't very nice to you. Thank you for showing me your kindness. I had forgotten about that interaction until he pulled me aside at the farmer's market. So it can really matter. The little things that you say and do, commenting on someone's coat, saying how you like someone's hairstyle, like it can really make a difference.
It's a lovely story. And I'm sure when you're dealing with people who are going through kind of end of life scenarios or, even if they don't know, like think about, maybe kids with cancer, right? May get cured, may not. My guess is they are all very hyper aware of like the minute things, right? And that could be, are you having a bad day? Are you not as, soft with your answers than you maybe normally would? So I think the story ties really well into that. And, it's just my assumption when you're talking to, people in that situation, they are probably even more hyper aware of what's coming at them.
Mm-hmm.
Korie, what did I neglect to ask you today? If someone's looking at going into this field, regardless of whatever tangent, they find their way into it, would you say it's important for people to know that maybe I neglected to ask about?
Well, first, what I would say for anybody interested in the field, and you're not quite sure like what path to take, I would reach out to someone like myself, Google or get on, the internet to find thanatology programs, reach out to the program directors. We can put you in touch with current students, prior students. We can help connect you to people in the field or who's doing something similar to what you want to do. Like I had mentioned prior in our conversation, there are grief centers, and especially if you live in like a big kind of city center like Philadelphia, New York City, Boston, San Francisco, like lots of places have grief centers. You can just call them up. You can just walk in. You can ask for information. Books are a really good place to start as well if you're just curious and you want to immerse yourself in these topics. That's what I would say
Perfect.
to the student that's like, is this right for me? I don't really know. We want to support you. And I'll oftentimes have prospective students reach out. We'll have a conversation. And I always follow it up with like, we're here if and when you're ready. We might not be the right program for you. And if not, that's totally fine. Like I want people to find the right fit of education and of experiences.
Very good. So Korie, thanks for your time today. You mentioned people can reach out to you. So what if someone does want to reach out either about the program, just ask you a question on your career? What are some of the best ways for someone to reach out and get a hold of you?
Yeah, so my website, which is KorieLeigh.phd.com. I am also on Instagram. My handle is at Dr. Korie Leigh. Specifically, if you're interested in the Thanatology degree, you can Google Marian University, and it is the Marian in Wisconsin, not Indianapolis. And there's lots of information there as well. You can reach out to one of our admission coordinators, and they're super responsive. Like if you email them today, you will get a response today.
Perfect. We'll link all that on the website and the show notes as well for anyone who might have missed that verbally, or I don't know if you're watching the closed captionings or whatever and they got it wrong there. So be sure to check out our website. We'll get that linked up. So Dr. Korie Leigh, everyone, hope you enjoyed today's episode. To explore other careers or share yours with us, just check out our website. We're there. Until next time, go Bills. And finally, go Sabres. Unboxing careers.